Good evening.
How are you, Bill?
I'm doing well.
Are you feeling better?
Muchly better.
Muchly
Muchly
more
better.
better.
Muchly more better.
Muchly more better. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. Yeah. Um, we've had a great time going through. You guys don't know because we had to fix the audio, but we've been
The last couple of weeks we've been good.
yeah. Um, been working through Matthew 13, and we got into Matthew 14 last week. A lot of parables in 13.
Yeah.
And so we spent quite a bit of time working through chapter 13, kind of like we did in the Sermon on the Mount, where we really kind of broke down each of the instructions, each of the parables, or if they were really short, we broke down two at a time.
Yep.
And what did we learn in that process about the parables? What are some things that we might have learned?
Well, what I can tell you from, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
I
hear
can
you.
tell you from my example that what I learned about parables when I was younger and first starting in Bible study was that
Yeah,
we don't get into enough depth. We only, like we say here, the pashat, the surface. We only see the surface and we accept that as enough information. And in the Western culture, we say, oh, cool. And we go on to the next thing. With what we've been doing, we've been going much deeper into the parables. We've learned the, I would say, the hidden meaning
yeah,
by the hints that it gives us. And we've also learned that if we take it into depth, that the combination of all of the parables can be combined as, like we've said, pearls of wisdom, where you string them together. And if you say, okay, now God is in all of this,
right.
that's what we have to learn is God is in it teaching us a lesson. And we have to study it enough to learn the lesson. Otherwise, it's just the surface material.
And in our Pashat level, surface level application that we've primarily done, um, haven't we've kind of displaced God a lot of times
Oh,
in
for
in how we understand
in
it.
every case,
Yeah,
learning the surface about it, you learn. And I don't know if we've been taught incorrectly.
right,
We just haven't been taught enough about it. And
right.
the reason is that we don't take the time.
Yeah,
And then we gloss over it, we skim over it. It's the, we've talked about it, the lullaby effect.
yeah,
Oh, yes, I've heard that in the sower and the seed, the everything about it,
yeah.
the pearl of great price. We just learn the surface information and we accept that and move on.
And and really, it's important. You talked about the term remez and that hinting. It's really Jesus hinting about this story, and he says it in a certain way and teaches it in a certain way because all of these parables are teachings.
Right. Every one of them.
And almost all of them start with the kingdom of heaven is like.
Yes.
And the reason they use the term the kingdom of heaven, they can't say God,
Right.
his name. It's
They can't say God in the
but they can
Hebrew text.
but they can reference where he lives,
Right.
because they are referencing God.
God.
That's how it's implied.
Well, everybody believes that no one else lives there.
Right. It's
except
just God. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the kingdom of heaven is like. So now we're to understand these teachings as the implications of what the kingdom of heaven is like. And so understanding that application isn't always these are your actions. It is, if you want to be part of God's kingdom and God's family, which is our pursuit, yes,
Right.
then this is what that's going to look like. And one thing that is relatively regular throughout these 8 parables that happen in chapter 13 is it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make much sense.
No.
It's like a
Well,
farmer who went into the field with a grain of mustard
But
seed.
that's why you have to study it. That's why you have to go deeper. That's why
Yeah,
you can learn more by going and understanding the drosh, the deeper understanding.
yeah. And like you said, the lullaby effect, we just hear it and we're like,
Yeah, I've heard that.
yeah, I've heard that. And it's like, okay, but have you heard it? Because nobody does that. Nobody takes a mustard seed and plants it in a field.
Right.
That is not normal.
Well, the thing that I always learned about the mustard seed is it takes the great faith of a mustard seed to get as big as it does. Well, the mustard seed in this parable is trouble.
Yes, it's trouble. It's
Big trouble. It doesn't take much trouble to spread throughout your field.
Yeah. And you're gonna be fighting it forever. Once you plant it, you're fighting that thing forever. Burn it, it's coming back.
Yeah.
Chop it down, it's coming back.
Why would you do that in the first place?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
It has nothing to do with the faith of a mustard seed.
And we finished up with them going fishing.
Yeah.
And
again,
after he got done, he had this long, or these multiple parables and this long teaching process, just like you or me, a long, hard day's work. We make the trip home. And this is a story we talked about last week, often gets misunderstood because immediately we think he went home and he was rejected. But was he rejected immediately when he went home?
No.
He wasn't. They were all in awe of him.
Well, they were excited because, hey, this guy's
this
guy's been doing great things, and wait till we see the things that he's doing for us.
Yes.
Wrong.
And then he reads it's all about us. Like, we know him. We're going to get great favor because he knows us and we know him. And then he reads this thing and he sits down and everybody's like, okay, there's more to that. Right? Like,
right, exactly.
And there's a pretty good discussion we had last week about, whether he just read what he read and avoided all the rest, or he read all of it and then came back to that and said.
But, we talked about this also, that the people knew the writings of Isaiah.
Yes.
And the people knew, and they heard him read that, and then they thought, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Is he really saying that about us?
And then he's like, well, don't you know?
Yeah.
There were widows everywhere.
Yeah. Not just here.
All throughout Israel, there were widows. None of them got fed and kept alive during this drought. And that's pretty.
Yeah. It's harsh words, especially coming from a favorite son.
Yeah. Don't you guys know that this is all about? And then they didn't take too kindly to that. And
well, and that's that other after they accused him of that, and I told this to Ronnie today. I said, after they accused him of that, he said, bring me my accusers, or basically bring two that can prove that these are blasphemous words.
Yeah.
And because they couldn't, he was able to walk away. And what I have always thought is that Jesus disappeared in the crowd, but he didn't. He just walked away from
And
them.
most people, like, even when you watch the movies and stuff, most people, that is the way they teach it. He disappeared. He was gone. No, he just
from
walked
their sight.
out.
No, he walked because they couldn't accuse him according to the law.
That's right. Like, tell me the law I've broken. Come and witness against me, and then toss me off this cliff.
Yeah.
And when he knew they had nothing to say, and he waited, I just see him waiting for my accusers. You brought me up here.
Mm-hmm.
What now? Because, I mean,
there's
only two ways I leave. I either leave on my own accord, or you toss me off this hill.
And subsequently stone me to death.
Yeah. But you're going to have, by law,
two
a reason. And I think we're going to see later on when he says, what good thing are you going to, like, what of what I have done, what good thing that I have done are you going to kill me for?
Yeah. And that stopped them in their tracks.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't. And so he left.
So,
which pretty much brings us to
and then
today.
John the Baptist died.
Right.
And he goes to grief. Didn't get much quiet. He got 5,000 men
following him. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talked about some of the semblances and the importance of those numbers and what
loaves
they mean.
and the fishes and the 50s and the 100s.
Yeah.
And I think that's another story that we don't follow through on, is that he's had his disciples set the crowd down and divide them into 50s and 100s.
Yeah.
Which is very significant.
Yeah. It would be it would represent groups of law, like complete groups of the law,
mm-hmm.
and complete groups of complete groups
of the 10 Commandments.
Yeah. So like we're talking about these divisions. He's laying these people out so they can see that the bread and the multiplication and the feeding isn't just for the people who are Christ followers or who are Jewish like law followers,
Right.
but for all people.
Yeah. Well, once again, he had the faithful or the Hebrews, and then
Yeah.
he had the Gentiles, the Mamzers.
And I love that he was
Again.
just that. I love that he was testing. Like we don't get it very well, but that he was testing Thomas. Like he sees the crowds and he knows, and he's just like, "Hey, how are we gonna do this?"
Yeah.
I
Thomas
have
doesn't
no
know.
idea.
We got no money.
There's
got
no
food.
way. And he's like, "Okay, go set everybody down." And the faith to just go, "Hey, Rabbi said sit down, so gather up and sit down."
But they knew it as young men why he was dividing them up.
Yeah.
Because of that. I think that, and we get lost in the loaves and fishes
Yes.
so much, even though that 5 loaves and 2 fishes mean more in
Yes.
the numerology part of it than anything. We get lost in the loaves and the fishes. We also get lost in the fact that as he blessed these small portions of bread and fish,
Yep.
that as he was doing that, his disciples were then feeding this whole crowd, and then they gathered up 12 baskets of leftovers.
Yep.
Representing
Pieces.
representing the 12 tribes of
12 tribes.
Israel.
A complete community, a complete following.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that complete following, and that it's from God. It's His completeness. It's His holiness. It's His creation. It's His word that is enough. That's what sustains us.
Right.
And so there's so much good stuff there. Everything worked out from there, right? And they live happily ever after.
Right. Let's go with that.
Oh, it's not how it works. All right, so we're gonna we'll try something a little bit different. We will we'll talk about this. We're gonna read through it, but I want to talk about this really quickly. I want to talk about faith because faith, according to Hebrews, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of the things that we cannot see.
Right.
It's a trust, and a lot of times it's a blind trust. I don't realize or recognize or know how we have the resources or if we even have the resources to do what you're saying we need to do, but I'm going to trust because you're my rabbi, you're my God, you're my Messiah, that this is the right way to go.
But that's one of the things that we find hardest to follow. Is our faith, and we get tied up in self again and again and again.
Agreed.
If I had faith to do this, then it wouldn't be such a struggle. But then I put myself in front of that faith and say, it's up to me.
And Jesus regularly tells the disciples who have chosen to leave everything.
Right.
What does he say to them?
Oh, ye of little faith.
Oh, ye of little faith. You little infants in the faith. We're eventually going to get to Matthew 19, and we're going to talk about this more in depth. But Jesus says something about children. He says, "Let the children come to me."
Yes, suffer the little children to come unto me.
Because if you had faith like one of these,
yes, right.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but like, what does that faith like a child look like? Because remember, we're talking about a culture that's very different from ours. Again, we talked a little bit about it last week. These disciples know there's thousands of people and very little food. But when God gives them instruction, when Jesus as their rabbi, any person that would have been in a rabbinical position, that would be a rabbi over any disciples, whether it's what we know as the 12 disciples or any Jewish disciples, any rabbi who is in that situation and tells his disciples to start sitting people down because something awesome is going to happen,
they would do it.
they would just do it.
Mm-hmm.
So when the rabbi begins to do things and goes through the motions of doing everyday activities, his Talmudim, his disciples are following right there. When he gives a command, they are going to follow without question because they believe that that obedience is what God is asking for,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that.
Well, it's taken them some time to learn,
Yes,
and because Jesus has led them through so many things,
right.
ask this, go do that, and they
Yes.
go and do it. They find a coin and a fish. They find a man with a donkey. They find, you know, everything that they need. He just sends them to it. And if they hadn't gone, they wouldn't found that.
That's
that,
right.
That thing. And so they've learned not to question him, but just do.
Right.
And that takes faith.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So let's read this very well-known story. I would try to let us read it all the way through because I think we're going to see it from a little different perspective today. And I think it's important for us to understand how much of the rabbi's life was he planning? Was he what? Well, let me say it this way. How much of the rabbi and the student, the Talmud's, the disciples' life is the rabbi intentional about? How much of it is he doing on purpose? Like, does he sit?
That's a really hard question.
Does he sit silently at times on purpose?
Well, I know that he seeks solace.
When I'm saying like when he's surrounded by his disciples and sees a situation happening, does he sit quietly and see how the disciples are going to respond to this situation sometimes before he opens his mouth because he's observing and
how they're going to react to
Yeah.
the same. I don't know. He must have done that some. I mean, a lot of times he used every waking moment as a teaching moment.
everything is a teachable moment?
Yeah, and he wanted them to understand that he knew. Well, maybe I don't think they could grasp that he already knew what was going to happen. But
Yeah, he knows what's coming.
But the fact that nothing was surprising to him.
Right.
He wasn't surprised by the crowds that followed him. He wasn't surprised by the people coming through the roof,
Yes.
lowering a cripple. He wasn't surprised with any of this stuff.
So, 4 of these young men have a family history of doing what?
Fishing.
Fishing. Being out on a boat.
Yeah, as a livelihood, yeah. They had to.
So what's the chances these young men could kind of have a sense of the weather pattern and what's coming?
Oh, they would know that. Say, hey, we can't go fishing today because there's a storm coming from the west, or the east or whatever. They would know just the cloud formations around the Sea of Galilee, what they couldn't do and what they could do, and fair weather fishing and they would have known.
I think those are good insights.
Right. Well, but you had to have that insight as a fisherman.
Yes.
I mean, not as a carpenter, and not as a townsman, as just a regular
as
farmer.
A tax collector, Matthew?
Probably not. He didn't care because you're going to collect taxes,
Probably wasn't.
Rain or shine.
Yeah,
it didn't make any difference.
So,
and the other guys that may not have been of that same thing, we don't know what a lot of them did. We know Matthew. We know John and James. We know
Peter,
what
James,
some of
John, Andrew.
We know what some of them did, but for the most part, we didn't have any idea
right
what they did, and they were kids.
Yes.
So
let's see if some of that perspective helps us as we read these 12 verses, and then we'll talk about them in an intentional way.
Chapter 14,
starting in verse 22.
22. And straightway Jesus constrained or told his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him under the other side while he sent the multitudes away.
Haven't we heard this before?
Yeah, he told them to get in the boat a lot of times.
The last time he told them to get in the boat, didn't he tell them to go to the other side?
Yep. Which we know from geographic experience wasn't very far.
Wasn't very far, but there's an intentional side he's talking about, right?
Yes.
I know I said I wasn't going to do this, but the other side is the non-Jewish side,
Right.
right?
He was going to send them over to Decapolis.
To the
or
Decapolis,
in the
yeah.
direction of the Decapolis.
Yes, yeah.
And when he
That
had
was the
sent the
intention.
multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening had come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary.
It was
blew
miles away.
Yeah, it blew up a storm.
It wasn't that far away, but I mean,
And
yeah.
in the fourth watch of the night, now that was between 9 and midnight.
This says between 3 and 6 in the morning.
3 and 6? Okay, well, I'm not a sailor, so that's 3 and 6.
So the first watch of the night would start at like 6 p.m.
6, right.
Be like 6 to 9. And
And-
the second watch would be like 9 to midnight.
Yeah, okay.
And the third watch would be midnight to 3.
So 3 to 6. So it was
And so the fourth watch
nigh
of the
on,
night.
nigh
would be,
on to morning.
yes, it was getting close to sunrise.
And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. Where have we heard this before? And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spoke unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid.
Yeah.
And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be you, bid me come to thee upon the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter came down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw when Peter saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and he began to sink, and he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore did you doubt?
Uh-huh.
And when they were come unto the ship, the wind ceased. Then those that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, It is of truth, thou art the Son of God.
All right. So here we are, this very common story.
For the disciples, yeah, it is a common story.
Yeah.
Get in the boat, we're going to have a shipwreck. No, get in the boat, we're going to have a storm. Get in the boat, Jesus will come and save us.
Any issues you have with this story? Anything that like sticks out is like, how is that possible? Well, I mean, obviously, somebody walking on water, kind of impossible, hard to fathom. That's fine. Other things that just are like, that doesn't make sense. I think it's strange that the story says when he saw the wind.
You talking about when Peter saw the wind?
Yes. When he saw that the wind was boisterous. Does yours say wind? Yeah, the boisterous wind. In verse 30?
Verse 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is...
He saw the wind.
What do you think, that's poetic license for the writer, or is that seeing the wind? I mean, you can see waves whipped by the wind, and you know that that's
You
wind
see the
blowing.
effects of
even
it,
though
yeah.
you can't see the wind, you know that that's the cause.
I think
of
maybe
the wind.
his beard like blew up in his face. And
It
he's
could
like,
be.
this is,
Yeah.
oh, the wind is really rough. Right? I mean,
But
just
like
asking
it's like
questions.
Helen said, when he took, and it doesn't say in the King James that he took his eyes off Jesus,
Yeah,
but
he
it
just
does
says he
say that
saw
in
the-
your book, right? Okay,
Just saw
did
the
it-
wind.
But does it say anything about Peter taking his eyes off Jesus,
Just saw the wind.
or did he just see the wind?
Saw the boisterous wind.
Yeah. So he didn't. It doesn't say that he took his eyes off Jesus, and that's how we hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, he saw the wind. Yep.
But
When he saw the wind, he was afraid.
Mhm.
So let's.
Okay, can you imagine you're not a surfer and the waves are 8 feet high and the breakers are above your head? Yeah.
So Rabbi Jesus
Walking on the water.
intentionally puts the disciples in this particular situation.
Again.
He instructed them to get in the boat and go ahead of him.
But they did.
This time without an argument.
Well, they didn't argue before, but what they were
There was a
afraid of.
pause.
Well,
right?
what
Didn't
they were afraid of is that, hey, where's Jesus? Well, he's underneath asleep.
No, before they got in the boat
Oh,
last time
yeah.
when he told them to go to the other side.
They say, well, they didn't want to go where
They
he
didn't
wanted
want to
them
go. And then Jesus said, "We're going."
Mm-hmm.
And they finally relented.
Yeah.
They're like, "We don't go to the other side. That's not." But this time, there's no delay.
No question.
He gets them in the boat, sends them, and it says immediately. So he's dispersing the crowds, tells them, "Get in the boat, meet me on the other side." Like,
It's funny that
yes, sir.
this boat is available. None of them owned a boat. None of them had a boat for hire
Just
because
ready
they
to
couldn't
go.
afford it. There was just a boat, and they got in the boat and they left. So somebody provided a boat, which
Yeah.
is, again, if you think about it, wait a minute, logic says, where'd they get the boat?
Right.
That doesn't, you ask me what seems
Yeah. Where'd this
weird.
boat come from?
Where'd the boat come
They just
from?
have a boat to use whenever they want?
Jesus' boat company? No.
Yeah.
It's just there, and they use it.
But immediately
And it's
Jesus
big enough for 13.
puts them in a boat and says, "Go ahead to the other side. I'll meet you there."
Mm-hmm.
So they're willing to go to the other side, unlike Jonah, right? Wasn't that the last one? Lena. So they're willing to go. Jesus knows they're going to be
Tossed by the wind.
tossed and put in this spot. So Jesus intentionally puts them in this tough spot. So as we go through this next part, again, we're talking about faith.
Right.
They're not sure what Jesus is up to, but he's just done another miracle, and he said, "I want you to get in the boat and go to the other side." So they said, "All right, we'll go to the other side. We'll go to the Decapolis, even though no one wants to go there."
Well, none of them had friends over there, that's for sure.
And the reason I asked the question I asked earlier is, what's the chances that by the clouds in the distance and everything going on, that Peter and James and John for sure, and potentially and probably even Andrew, looked at the clouds as they were getting in the boat and they were like, "I hope you're ready for this."
But did they? It might have been a perfectly calm day when Jesus said, "Go get in the boat,"
It could have been.
and he might have commanded.
But what's the
That's-
what's the chances that they saw the clouds on the horizon and said,
Good. They're good.
there's
It could be.
there's a chance this is going to be a rough night.
Yeah.
And the rest of the disciples were like, "What do you mean rough?"
Okay. Well, we know how big the Sea of Galilee is,
Yeah,
and we know that it doesn't take a whole long time to get to the other side.
but clearly it took them all night.
But it took them a while because Jesus said, "Get in the boat," and on the fourth watch, here they all of a sudden we've been out here for 6-8 hours.
Yes.
We're still not there, and the wind is really picking up. Well, maybe they've been fighting the headwind,
And
for
they
all
could have
those
been
hours, yeah.
again, yes.
but they were going to the other side because that's what he'd commanded. So let's go.
Yeah. What is it like to watch a kid learn how to walk?
It's funny.
It is. They're top heavy.
They just can't.
Yeah,
They
or
can't. Well, little legs don't perambulate like you expect them to. Yeah.
How do we treat little kids as they're learning how to walk? How do we treat them in the So there's definitely one school of thought is like,
Oh, they're
as
going to
they're
hurt
starting like,
themselves.
ooh, don't, like baby proof everything. Just put padding on everything and like,
Yeah, well, the first one seems to be the one that you think is going to break.
now
Yeah, get going.
once they start moving pretty decently on their own,
Yeah. Until they get tall enough to bang their head on a table, you don't really worry about it.
you just kind of watch them.
I don't know how many times we watched Nicholas almost bang his head.
Yeah,
I watched her bang her head several times.
yeah.
But I have a picture I want to show. I wanted to bring it tonight. The first time that she actually walked by herself, she was on a deck behind the house,
Yeah.
and she walked up the ramp all by herself.
Yeah.
Hand,
So
the hand comes off the rail, and there she goes.
one of the hard things about a kid learning to walk as a parent or a grandparent or
Just letting
aunt,
them do it.
uncle is like, when do you help?
Yeah, you got to let them be alone.
They gotta.
It's hard to do that.
Yeah, because like we're like, ooh, that's not right, and they're in danger. But like, there's a process going on in their brain of like feedback. They're getting constant feedback. It's crazy how intelligent uh, little people are because they're doing all these like high tech physics calculations.
It's called
Of
motor skills.
Yes, these motor skills are like they are literal like physics calculations. Basically, they don't know that, and we can't express that to them. But like, especially like they start to walk up a slope, or they start to walk down a slope, and if they're top heavy, you're worried they're going to go wee and start rolling down a hill and never stop.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or start to go up a hill, and their weight goes back, and they're just and
Yeah.
and most of the time when a kid is learning to walk, the less you intervene,
The faster they learn.
the faster they learn
Yeah.
because you're not disrupting the learning process.
Right.
You're not disrupting the process of education.
So for all you first-time parents out there,
Yeah. Like but then the other thing is as they're learning, the feedback they receive is important.
right? It's got to be positive.
When a kid falls, if you freak out, you know what I mean, like, oh, you're okay, and get them up and like start checking for injuries.
That's when the crying starts.
Yeah, they're gonna start to respond to that.
And everything after that becomes a boo-boo.
Yeah, everything becomes a boo boo and a reason to cry and a reason to need attention because I need help all of a sudden when they didn't need help just a few minutes ago, right?
Right.
So then again when you're learning to walk, when a kid is learning to walk, when do you help them? What type of feedback is necessary? When how do we celebrate? What are we supposed to celebrate? Like how often don't we celebrate when a kid starts walking? They like take a couple of steps and fall down, and we're like, "Yeah, you got this."
You
and
get
like,
so excited and they fall down.
Yeah.
If you just be quiet, they will continue to walk.
but we're still excited that they did something,
right.
and it's that celebration that kind of makes them go, "Oh yeah, that's good. I should do that again."
Mm-hmm.
So then
They try
they
harder.
figure out how to get themselves back up and go again. And maybe last time they took 2 steps and now they take 3 steps. Or last time they took 2 steps. But if they took 2 steps last time and they go to take another step, a big step, and they fall down and didn't even get 1 step, is it now time to like completely intervene and change the situation?
That's negative feedback on their part because then they do the physics calculation.
Yeah, they're
Again.
processing in their head.
Right.
Okay, that didn't work, so I've got to do something different.
Right.
So then they get up and try again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they get up and try again, and they get up and try again. As long as you're not in like, hey, if this kid falls down and they're gonna bust their head open.
I think what you're aiming at is that when do we interfere? When we know for sure that they're in danger.
Right.
That's when we interfere. But by and large, if they're walking in a
Yeah.
fairly uncrowded room, on a carpet or whatever.
Or even like in grass.
Yeah, just let them go.
Yeah, like let them keep working. Like
Yeah, it's fine. I think if we have to
protecting them
we
from
have
like
we have to temper ourselves in any situation
yeah.
when you're trying to teach somebody something, even as a teacher in your own right or something. You have to let them fail,
Yes.
and if they don't learn how to fail, they'll never learn how to succeed.
And if they don't learn how to fail, they'll never learn how to be diligent.
Right.
They'll
So,
never learn how to try again.
right. You
And
don't.
again.
Yeah. You raise a quitter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
and so um in this conversation about maybe the most famous of like I think this might be the one that I've heard outside of like Jesus on the cross. This might be the miracle of Jesus that I have heard preached more than any other sermon, any other lesson, anything ever in
This particular
this
event,
one. Yeah,
the
this
walking
event.
on the water.
Yes.
Right. I agree. It is probably
Because we're faith people and it takes faith to get out of the boat. I don't know how many times I've heard somebody preach, get out of the boat. Just get out of the boat. What's God calling you to get out of the boat? And okay, I'm not saying don't get out of the boat. Maybe you do need to get out of the boat. But it's an interesting happening because Jesus knew what was coming and intentionally pushed his disciples into this space. Now this time they weren't scared of the storm.
right.
It was a big storm, or it was a storm.
Well, it said here in Scripture that they were they're afraid of the
ghost.
the image, the spirit.
That's right.
Because did they realize it was Jesus, or were they afraid of the?
It was Baba Yaga
Yeah.
reference. Anyway, it's from Ant-Man. You didn't get that? Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga is Baba Yaga. Anyway,
I thought that was a reference to.
it is like a Slavic ghost story reference.
Yes.
Like Baba Yaga. Nick would think it was hilarious. Anyway, but these like what Sleepy Hollow, the headless horseman, like maybe they were thinking it was like some type of there's a ghost story of people on the water or something.
You think that these Hebrew fishermen who wouldn't be out on the
normally it wouldn't be
Galilee at
overnight.
night?
Yeah, normally not a nighttime
No,
trip.
I'm thinking they probably have never seen anything on the water, day or night, other
Yeah.
than clear skies, fish in the water, and they hadn't seen anything on the horizon
Yeah.
walking to them.
Yeah, I
as a
wonder what
man.
type of ghost stories they had that they were like, oh, it's a ghost.
Probably none. That's probably
But
not.
somebody responded that way.
Yes. Well, they were afraid.
They were afraid there was a ghost.
They saw a
It's like-
spirit.
yeah. It's like, are we talking spirit? Okay. All right. I'll get down with spirit. Okay. So they're thinking this is like a demonic spirit
Could be.
coming this way because like they're out in the middle of the ocean, not the ocean, in the middle of the sea.
Mm-hmm. A very small sea.
It has to be like nobody's out here. That has to be a spirit.
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, don't worry, it's me.
And as soon as Peter hears that,
And Peter hears it and is like, that's Jesus' voice.
well, no, he says, "If that's you,
If it's you,
calling,
call me to come and I'll come out there with you.
Yeah.
He says,
So
come.
Is that like a dare on Peter's part, or is that if that's you, call me out?
Um,
Right. There you go. That's
Yeah.
where I was. That's where I was going.
yeah. So if so to prove that it's not a demonic spirit, he speaks the name of Jesus. Says, Lord, if that's you,
Call me. Tell me to come out.
tell me to come. Simple. Just says, come. So he climbs out of the boat and begins to walk on the water towards Jesus. And it says he saw the wind and he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him. O you of little faith, why did you doubt? So we've already talked about he saw the wind, but he got out of the boat. Again, we covered this obedience thing that happens in their culture that we aren't used to because we don't practice this. This isn't our culture, and it is hard because it's not our culture. The rabbi is not anybody except who they make him to be, right?
Right.
Not related, not any person. Like if you were talking to an American, a Westerner, who are the people of significance that when they say, hey, I need help or I need you to do this for me, you're going to jump up and do it? Mom, dad, grandma, grandpa.
I think that,
and in the Western world, probably not even that.
well, it's probably only out of blind obedience because they have a power over you.
Yes.
As a part of a boss or a
yes. Drill sergeant.
Yeah, somebody
right?
higher ranking in the military. Yeah, where the blind obedience is required.
Yes.
Whether you like it or not.
And if it's not required in the Western culture,
you don't do it.
You're not going to get it.
Yeah. Unless you're faced with extreme duress.
Yes. So most often in our culture, I know this from personal experience, most often in our culture, you give an instruction and the answer is why?
Yeah, there's always a question about
why.
What do you want me to do, or
why should I have to do that? Yeah. Yeah. Why? Yeah. Not a joke. Tell somebody in my house. Just a complete disregard. Blind obedience. Blind obedience would be like a disregard and not only a trust of consequences
or safety,
and it is developed by a confidence in the person given the instruction. Does that make sense? I think more often than not, the confidence and the courage it takes to take faithful steps, diligent steps after failure is easier for young people. I believe it is easier for children. I believe that the faith of a child is more accurately described because they have the confidence to continue doing without regard for what the previous outcome was, because they believe this is what they're supposed to be doing because they don't know any better. So they have this confidence. They have this blind faith, this disregard for the potential catastrophe that lies ahead because they don't know that a catastrophe is an option. The older we get and the more experienced we get, the more aware of the potential consequences we get. Does this make sense? Are we on the same page?
Yeah.
So blind faith, I believe, gets harder as we get older and more experienced.
Right. Well, I think that a child, for example, before they're born, they're swimming in amniotic fluid.
Yeah.
When they're born, you can throw them in the pool and they will swim.
Yeah.
Because it's something they've been doing for the past.
And you can teach them how to do recovery stuff. There's a lot of people who do this.
So there's no fear
right
instilled in their thought process.
Right.
The only when we talk about blind obedience here, I don't think we know that in the Western culture, but Eastern cultures. And what came to me right away was the Yakuza,
Yeah.
the Japanese idea that my boss said I must do it, and so I must do it, regardless
Yeah.
of what my thoughts, my fears, my potential is.
Yeah.
I have to do that. And we saw that in the Japanese soldier in World War II.
Right.
We saw that as because it's a blind obedience
Yes.
to charge through the gates.
Go ask again. Yeah. Okay, so this is a great point. Yes. 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 So blind obedience. Uh, so our immediate response is that blind obedience is based on the trust level and the expertise level and of of the person given the instruction, because people have taken advantage of kids. They have hurt them. They take advantage of all kinds of people. Like, I don't know how many scams there are laying around, or in emails or phone calls or in the mail, or like there's all of these things going on all at the same time,
the
like
distrust,
constantly.
the distrust
Yeah.
is greater than the trust.
So, but the culture of we don't understand in the Western culture trust, because and again, we're talking about a if we place ourselves in this situation, if Jesus calls us to come, are we going to hear his voice and move? Or are we going to ask for confirmation and ask someone else to pray with us to prove that it's true? And, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, do we need more confirmation, or do we trust God? Yeah. Faith. Yeah. The substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Yeah. It is. And so, if the question is the faithfulness and the abilities and the trustworthiness of the person giving the instruction, well, in our lives, we're reading the Evangelion. This is the gospel, the Evangelion according to Matthew.
Right.
The gospel of Jesus Christ. And that Evangelion is a declaration of what again?
A new king.
A new king and a new kingdom. How do you declare I have a new king without declaring obedience to him?
You can't.
If the king makes a decree, who's going to obey it?
Everyone.
Everybody in the kingdom. They're compelled.
Yeah, they're compelled.
They're compelled
And yeah,
to obedience.
and every other Evangelion or every other good news report has come with the coming of a new king.
Right.
In the lives of these people and their generations before them.
So if this Evangelion has come and we're declaring a new king and a new kingdom, and Jesus gives instruction, is there space there for an evaluation of how it might affect me?
Shouldn't be.
Is that so that caveat's not in?
It's not in there. It should
in a
be
kingdom
the
relationship.
the king said, "I must do." Period.
Yeah.
There's no question right, wrong, or indifferent. It's that here's the new decree.
Right? It's not a concern of how it affects me.
Right.
It's my obedience. My king has asked of me. My king has compelled me. This is my movement.
Right.
We are people of faith. Yes,
Yes.
Peter is acting in faith. Jesus calls him of little faith because you doubted.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So there's a couple things here. Did Peter fail?
No, he he obeyed.
He obeyed the command.
He obeyed the command, and he went out.
How many steps did he take on the water?
Well, we don't know.
Enough to be outside the boat, right?
Well, away from the boat, at least some, until he looked away.
So if he was a newborn,
right,
would we celebrate this as a victory?
Yes.
Or would we try to like give this newborn pointers on how they should walk?
No. We should just say, hey,
celebrate, get him back up, and do this thing
back.
again.
Right.
Like, did you see what was possible? I bet you can go further next time.
Mm-hmm.
They are immediately back at the boat. It just says.
Well, we do know that Jesus carried him.
Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased.
Right. So when it took some little time, we know that.
So let's just play this out. If they're a little ways from the boat, and Jesus grabs him by the hand and picks him up, Jesus doesn't like carry him, right? He just
helps him back to the surface.
Helps him back to the surface, and they walked on water back to the boat.
I guess.
Without the doubt, without the fear.
Because I'm holding the hand of the man that I trust.
So here's my question. So first question was were Peter's actions a success or a failure?
A success.
A success, okay?
He followed the instructions, and he went without doubt and took command of the situation by walking on the water.
Okay, so the second question I have
he didn't know he was going to be walking on the water.
Right.
He knew that he was going to go see Jesus.
Going to Jesus.
And Jesus happened to be walking on the water.
That's right.
He took it on faith that he too would be walking on the water.
Rabbi's doing it, I can do it too.
Right.
I'm called to follow Rabbi. He's walking on water. He called me to come out there with him. I've got to go.
Right.
Second thing, what does Jesus say to him?
What first?
Oh, you of little faith.
Why did you doubt? Now,
why did you doubt?
Is he doubting Jesus or is he doubting himself?
That is exactly the question I was going to ask.
Got to you, didn't I?
Yeah.
I think Jesus is saying, why did you doubt yourself?
Yeah.
I really think that that's what Jesus was asking him. Oh, ye of little faith, why did you doubt? And without adding that yourself. And that's what's important. Because Jesus never asked us to do anything because he knows that we have that capability. Where we fall short is we start doubting our own ability, our own resources, our own skill. And that's the only time that we should think about self is that I'm doing what Jesus has bid me to do or asked me to do. This is the path. This is the path that he's asked me to follow.
Yeah.
And I need to follow this. And where we fall short is when we doubt ourselves and our ability to do something that Jesus said, do it.
What happened in the rabbinical tradition? You have a rabbi.
Right.
He's empowered to teach.
Right.
What does he do? Once he's empowered to teach, he's a teacher without students. Right?
Right. Well, he has to go seek others that want to follow him. So he has to gather.
So disciples. How does Jesus gather them?
He says, "Come follow me." He just
come and follow me.
Yeah. as a rabbi, young rabbi that has just been released or empowered by his
Yes.
own rabbi. No, we're
Yes.
talking not Jesus, but any person else has been studying for the last 25 years.
Yes.
There were probably young children
Yep.
who have been pushed out the door and say, "Hey, there's a rabbi. He's got no one following him. Go follow him." And that rabbi might say, "Come, follow me."
Yeah.
And at that point, that child, because they know
Yeah.
that that's the path to a better life as a priest,
Yeah.
their family has been pushing them to seek out find a rabbi,
Right.
because you've been studying and studying, and now here's your chance.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you probably have kids ready to run out the door and say, "Hey, look, there's a rabbi that's just been empowered."
And most of them, they have an application process.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that
But
at some
yes,
point,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Families have been looking for a rabbi without disciples for their
So now,
2-year-old even.
so when a rabbi says, "Come, follow me,"
You're chosen
why?
because first of all, you're Jewish.
Yeah, that
You're a
would help.
Jew.
Yeah.
No one else going to get chosen,
Yeah.
first of all. And that rabbi has been empowered
Yeah.
to teach the next generation, the next group. Now, whether they
Now, what does he see? What might the rabbi see? Like, if you're going to hire someone to be an apprentice with you for all that you do, you're going to see something in that person, right?
hopefully,
There's going to be something that you
yeah,
see. Ideally, you're going to see, even if they're not skilled at the moment, you see a person who has the potential to do what you do,
yeah, hopefully, yeah,
to be a duplicate
you,
of you.
I think with any skill set, you look for someone that you think, hey, you can probably pick this up
So,
pretty
do you
easily.
think maybe it's important for the calling of Jesus, like Jesus calling us and say, "Come and follow me," that Genesis says that we're made in the image of God after his likeness? Do you think maybe it is important when Jesus is calling us and he's wooing us, even today, calling out to us saying, "Come follow me," that Genesis says that we are made in the image of God after his likeness we are created?
Right.
That this call of God on each of us is that the image of God, the likeness of God, the capability of God, empowered by the Holy Spirit, is why Jesus calls us and then tries to grow us in faith to trust him. So when he calls out to Peter and says, "Come follow me," like to come out of the boat, that he's able, without doubting God or doubting his faith and doubting that call to him, he just acts without consideration of this could be bad.
Yeah. Well, I think that Jesus saw something in each one of these young men
Yes.
that he knew would be a faithful follower. And he had to instruct them, as
Yeah.
a rabbi would, in the way that they could be more successful. Because they weren't all successful young men to begin with. They had
Yeah.
flunked out of school. We already know this.
Right.
And so he saw in them something that their previous rabbi may not have seen,
Right.
or a previous rabbi may have said, "Well, you're not learning the Talmud and the Torah like you should. You
Yeah.
haven't memorized everything." Jesus knew that that wasn't important.
Yeah.
What he wanted was to have men of faith
Yeah.
in him and not the law, because he came to what?
Fulfill it.
Fulfill it. So the same thing would go when if I can, now you've heeded the call of the Lord,
Right.
and to do what you're doing, and it took effort on your part.
Yes.
You took struggles on your part to get to where you are.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we grow in our understanding,
Yeah.
I think, and we grow in our faith and we grow in our ability to understand.
Yep.
I'm growing week by week. I've said this before.
Yeah.
And I said it again to Ronnie this morning. I said, over the past weeks, I've said, I've developed a speech or a sermon or something I want to teach about the soil.
Yeah.
Because it's really sticking in my head.
Yeah.
So I think that as we learn more about ourselves and our faith,
Yeah.
then we are growing. And at that point, at some future point, God's going to say, hey, Bill, I want you to do this.
Yeah.
And I'll have the ability to answer at that point.
Yeah.
Where I would fall short now is that I don't have enough faith in myself to say, now, public speaking, not a problem.
Right.
But I want to be able to do it in such a way that I can lead others
Right.
to a deeper understanding. And that's where.
So this leads me to my next question that I was going to ask. Do you trust yourself or your faith or even God himself enough to get out of the boat?
Take the next step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The step of, like, if this doesn't work,
Well,
then what? Like the option of Peter getting out of the boat. Like if his concept is, I'm going to get out of the boat, and he starts thinking about getting out of the boat, like the consequences of getting out of the boat were
dire.
It was death.
He probably didn't know how to swim.
He wasn't even like that wasn't going through his head
No,
at all.
At all. No.
The consequences of getting out of the boat weren't a concern.
Right.
It was the communication of God.
Right.
It's the communication of Jesus saying, "Come."
Exactly.
And like, do we have the faith? Do we have the trust in God and ourselves enough to get out of the boat?
Yeah, it's a tough thing because you've heard all your life, sink or swim.
Yeah.
You either going to get out of the boat and do it, or you're going to be in the boat for the rest of your life.
And then
where's your choice?
And then realistically, if stuff is hard, like when we see the waves, like when we start to see the hardship, do we have the faith to remain?
That's what I said earlier, where we get in our own way.
Yeah. Like, do we have, like, if God is calling us to an impossible situation, or we find ourselves in a space that seems impossible, do we have the faith in God to stay there?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
And not build an exit strategy. And so I think those are important steps. And so the ultimate question through this story is, what is Jesus teaching his disciples? Like, if this is a story that is included from a firsthand experience, and Jesus, as a rabbi, intentionally, willfully put his disciples in this situation.
He's teaching them that if they're, this is what I'm thinking, is that he's teaching them that if your faith remains in me, then I will be here for you regardless.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's trying to teach them, is that I'm here in an impossible situation.
Right.
I'm here. Put your faith in me alone. Get out of your own way, Peter.
Yeah.
And just follow me. And I think that's...
So if he gives you instruction to get in a boat and head to the other side at night, things that you would not do.
Not normally, no.
You normally wouldn't get in a boat overnight.
Well,
normally wouldn't head to the other side.
Where I didn't want to go in the first place, yeah.
Yeah. When he gives those simple instructions,
But they've already done that.
I know.
But this is okay. The end part of the story is that
Yes.
one of them, it only took one because I think everyone else saw Peter out of the boat going, "Hey, where you going?
Yeah.
Don't you know that you're going to
Yeah.
sink?" They all learned
Were
at
they
the
playing
same.
rock, paper, scissors for who's the next top
No,
disciple?
Peter stood up and said, "If it's you, Lord, call me."
Yeah.
What what they all learned at the same time that Peter did is that we can walk on water,
Yeah.
if we have our keep our eyes on Jesus.
So do you think, so then for us on the backside of this and them in the moment,
Right.
do you think this is one of those capstone moments and why it's included in the gospel? Almost every gospel includes this story because this is when the disciples realized that regardless of what situation they were facing,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the word of God says,
Right.
they can stand on it regardless of the situation.
Well, and it says in the scripture that immediately as they were in the boat, the wind ceased.
Yeah.
It became calm, and probably the sun rose up at
Right.
6 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, I think that the storm probably would not have continued after this occurs,
Yeah.
because it was no longer necessary for Jesus to be teaching that lesson. The
And-
lesson is over.
Yeah.
You've learned, and remember it. And I think that, like you said, it became a teaching moment. He used it to teach.
And what was the disciples' response? What did they get from all of this? They make a final declaration.
Is that
And
the
say,
next verse?
truly you
Are
are
the Lord.
the Son of God.
Right. They've said that more than once. It
Yeah.
probably either to themselves or to others. Hey, he really is who he says he is.
Yes.
Yeah.
He said, truly you are the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
So
everything's possible.
Right away, they praised him.
Yeah.
For who he was.
Yeah.
And who he is. Yeah.
Because in their culture, water is chaos, right?
Chaos, right. Well,
he brings the chaos to an end.
Right.
Matter of fact, in the midst of the chaos, you can walk through it unharmed,
right,
unafraid.
Mm-hmm. Because they'd been there in that chaos before.
Yeah.
This time they weren't afraid of the storm.
Yeah.
What they were afraid of is this spirit.
Yeah.
And they learned that they didn't even have to fear that. This is our rabbi.
This is like the definition of peace that passes understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a situation that they should never be in and don't have any experience in, you can still go from an experience you have no experience. You can go from an experience being led into a space that you don't have any experience in, and you can be led further beyond that just through the Word of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you have faith.
If you just have faith, just trust the Word of God and the calling of God, regardless of where that might lead you, regardless of the hardship that might lead you to, regardless of the uncertainty that might lead you through, the impossibleness of whatever situation is not our evaluation of it.
Yeah. Well, I keep saying, get out of your own way.
Yeah.
Let God guide you through that turmoil that you perceive.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think this is a great space. We're gonna have some discussion. I'm sure there are things about to be said, and you should come and join us.
Put your hand in the hand of the man who calmed the waters.
Yeah.
Put your hand in the hand of the man who calmed the sea. Yeah.
Very good. We're gonna finish up chapter 14 and start chapter 15 next week.
All right. Good night.